Hello and welcome to episode 17 of series 3 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from the Big Picture People. Well, this is our 80th episode, believe it or not. I was looking at our schedule for upcoming episodes and I number all of the podcast episodes. So I've got a spreadsheet with all of our previous episodes on and all the ones that we've got planned for the future. And I looked down the list and hey presto, this is the 80th episode. I couldn't believe it. I can't believe it's flown by. If you'd asked me to think how many podcasts we'd put out, I would have said about half that in my head. But it's amazing how time flies when you're having fun, and I've had a great deal of enjoyment and fun and stimulation and learning from speaking to such wonderful people over the last 2.5 years. So thank you for everyone who's contributed. Thanks for everyone who's listened. Now, on that subject, I just wanted to also say thank you to everybody who got back to me regarding my last shout out or request on the previous episode. I mentioned that we are trialing some software where I can send a link out to someone who'd like to be on the show but doesn't want to be fully interviewed, and it's kind of like an automated interview. I will ask you some questions, you can respond to them, and this very clever piece of software will edit together my questions and your responses asynchronously. So it's and obviously I'm not going to pretend that it's a live interview, but it will sound like we're actually interacting with each other. The advantage of that is for people who don't want to, they don't really want to necessarily speak for half an hour or so on the show, but they'd like to just pop on and just talk a little bit about what they're doing. And I'm thinking of having this as a little kind of features section on the podcast, just in addition to the usual interviews. So anyway, I did put that request out last time, and I got a great response, and it's kind of put me on the spot a little bit because it was kind of, rather than build it and they will come, I thought, well, let's see if they come and then I'll build it. So I have got the software. Don't worry, I'm not that disingenuous, but I need to work out properly how to use it. So everyone who's come back to me, thank you so much. I will get back to you if I've not done so already, and I will get in touch with you and I'll send you the link. And it is a little bit of an experiment. So and I'm saying that in the emails back to you just to say, look, bear with me. It's a bit of a trial just to see if it works. And obviously I'm hoping that it will just bring some more voices to the podcast. So on that note, if you are interested in being part of that, if you missed the last show, it's basically, we're going to have some little sound bites. If you want to be on the show, but you don't want to go through a whole interview, and you it's a kind of a dip your toe in the water and being a podcast guest opportunity, then let me know. And you can do that via sending an email to me at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. And also, if you are interested in being a full interview guest, I'm always interested in finding out if you've got some interesting stories, maybe a case study that you'd like to share, that something you've been working on, or you've got a new tool or something, a new channel that you found, then please let me know. Again, info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, and we can get you. I can send you an email and tell you what the process is for being a guest on the show, and we can have a quick chat just to talk about what you're going to talk about on your interview, and we can line it up. And at any stage, if you decide it's not for you, there's no pressures, no obligation, it's not for everybody. And sometimes what seems like something you want to do doesn't always turn out to be the case. So that's there's no commitment, there's no worry about having to overstretch yourself if you decide actually further down the line you haven't got the time or it's not for you. So get in touch with us, info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. So we have got some fantastic guests for you coming up in the next couple of episodes. In a fortnight's time, on the 13th of September, I've got David Hutchins, the storytelling leader, who's going to be telling us all about his work, which has been working with some really large organizations, helping their leaders to become better at telling stories, at telling the narrative of the organization, and how that links into to organizational effectiveness, and particularly into effective comms. And David's got some brilliant structures, so different story structures that he's going to share with us there that we can use in our work, and we can help our leaders to use as well. And then after that, on the 27th of September, I have an interview with David Oates, who is from a business called the PR Security Service. And really interesting topic, this really interesting conversation. He's going to be talking about how you put internal comms first in a crisis. So I've yet to work in an organization that hasn't at some point in its history experienced some sort of crisis. Some have more than others, but it's always good to think about what's my role as an internal communicator in a crisis. And David's perspective is that actually, rather than worrying about our PR and external communications, actually our first port of call should be our own people. We should be communicating first and foremost with them. So really interesting perspective on crisis handling, crisis communications, and from a very different angle to what we'd probably normally expect that to be. So look out for that one on the 27th of September. Sorry, I'm conscious it's a bit of a long-winded intro. The final thing I just wanted to say is that same week as that episode that I've just mentioned, the day after, in fact, we've got another one of our free webinars. I won't talk about it for too long. It's a health and safety webinar. It's all about transforming your health and safety communications and training. And it's a free webinar to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 28th of September, 2022 at 3 o'clock p.m. UK time. It's totally free. And if you want to book up for that, go to our website, thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, and go to our events tab, and you will find it's the second event underneath our big picture webinar. It's the one underneath that, so you'll be able to book up there. Anyway, I won't take any more of your time, and I will let you listen to this episode's interview. Part of the work that we do at the Big Picture People is to help organizations to align their people around their vision, their mission, their goals, and their values. But it's often we find that alignment has multiple meanings. It's a term that gets misused, it gets misunderstood, and that we find that leaders sometimes think alignment is one thing. It's everybody pointing in the same direction, which is certainly a part of alignment, but it's much deeper than that. It goes down to an individual level with how aligned I am to the organization. It's alignment within my team as to whether we're all pulling in the same direction with a shared common goal. And it's alignment across the whole organization as to how we're focused on delivering the outcome for our customers or our service users. So what I wanted to do in the podcast was to explore the concept of alignment and what does it actually mean, and are there different levels of alignment or different areas of alignment that we need to be thinking about as internal communicators and employee engagers to help us to understand what we need to be doing to create that multiple levels of alignment, and ultimately to understand how that alignment then fits to the external market. Whether we think we're in a commercial organization with customers paying, or whether we're in a service organization, the market is a term that we can use to understand the people who are our end users, the people who we serve, and how their needs affect that alignment within our organization. So that's what we're going to be looking at in today's interview. We're going to be exploring the concept of alignment, and to do that, I reached out to an expert. He's written a book. The book is called Alignment, and it's all about how we can understand what that alignment looks like and how we can improve alignment within our organization to ensure that we are delivering on our promise and we are delivering our shared objectives towards our vision. So, over to today's interview. My guest today is Jonathan Hensley. Jonathan is CEO of Emerge, which is a digital product agency where he works with clients to transform their business strategies, user needs, and new technologies into valuable products and services. Jonathan is an accomplished writer and speaker, and he has lectured on topics such as the connected consumer's impact on business, creating value through data-driven experiences, and user-centric approaches to innovation. Jonathan has recently authored Alignment, which is a book about overcoming internal sabotage. So, hello, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Greg.
It's an absolute pleasure. And just for our listeners, where are you in the world? Where is home for you at the moment?
Home for me is in Portland, Oregon, in the States.
Portland, Oregon. And just for our non-US listeners, that's the northwest of the United States. Yeah, right up in the sort of top right left-hand corner of the country.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
Fantastic, excellent, and we were just chatting before the show, and you're off on your holidays to Hawaii soon, so conjures up very, very, very nice visual scenes of your upcoming holiday. So I'm sure we're all jealous about that. So, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your work, though? So I kind of went through your profile there, and there's a lot of interesting stuff that you're working on. Kind of tell us a little bit more about what you're doing and what led you to this point. Tell us a little bit about your career to date, please, Jonathan.
Sure. Well, over the last 20 plus years, I have been helping empower product leaders to deliver digital products and help transform their businesses through engaging with customers to really drive innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And over the last several years, this interesting question started to appear about why do so many digital transformations and product initiatives fail? And what's
Mm-hmm.
really happening behind the scenes, and really trying to understand the root cause of failure. And that led to several years of research, hundreds and hundreds of interviews with product leaders and product teams all around the world, which then resulted in the book Alignment, really surfacing the couple of the key insights that really shone through on those that were able to overcome the odds and continuously deliver success for not just one product or one organization, but again and again, and really trying to put a spotlight on those themes and those critical skills that are necessary to build the highest performing teams
Mm.
and realize that success.
Excellent. So, just to put a bit of kind of give us a sort of an idea of the types of products. If you, I mean, obviously there may be some confidentiality there that you don't want to mention any specific names or brands, but the type of products that you're talking about when you're talking about the sort of digital products that you've been involved with there, or in helping organisations to kick off and get started.
Sure. Well, we work with a large spectrum of types of products. We look at, the different types of products about how we might solve for convenience or communication problems,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
whether it might be a consumer product or business to business products. How do we drive and build education for large teams or collaboration tools that might help um, folks from around the world communicate and effectively, deliver on the promises of the companies and the brands that they represent.
Okay.
And one of the big emphases these days is also on employee experience. How do
Right.
we really develop internal products to empower our teams so that we can really drive the innovation and effectiveness of the company's efforts going forward?
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Good. And as you said, you've alluded to there, your focus is really on, despite regardless of the technical aspects of what you're doing, it's really on the leadership and the leaders working within those organisations. And I know when we spoke originally before we when we spoke originally to set up this interview, you were telling me around and a really interesting thing, which is around major transformations. You had this. Your experience was that leaders tend to delegate away some of their critical roles within a transformation, and that tends to undermine or sabotage the transformation. Could you tell a little bit more about that, please?
Absolutely. I think a lot of leaders assume that their responsibility is in defining the a vision. And that
Mm,
vision is usually looked at as, kind of what is our ambition as an organization? What are we
mm,
trying to achieve for ourselves? And that is often looked at as, kind of, I've given you the purpose, now I'm going to delegate it. Go figure out how we're going to do that.
mm,
And oftentimes the responsibility of the leader has fallen short in that that's not enough. Actually developing the direction and a clear strategy for an organization to be successful is much more encompassing of not just establishing the general direction, but
mm,
being able to very simply be able to communicate the reason to believe in what's happening,
mm,
why this is important, how we're going to measure our progress of moving towards that vision, and
mm,
many times that's missing, And then the actual responsibility of communicating and making sure that every level of the organization has a shared understanding so that all of the individuals involved can work towards aligning towards that purpose and bringing together the people, the processes, and the resources to achieve that extraordinary outcome that they're trying
Mm, mm,
to work towards. And so leaders really have a much deeper responsibility. And one of the ways that leaders, the best leaders really take that on is the outcome is important, but what they become is they become experts in the problem they're solving. And they really fall in love with the problem and not the idea of the destination, and certainly not solutions. And
mm,
they really focus on that so that that way they can really help support the teams and these incredibly gifted and smart people, and leveraging their expertise and their experience to solve those problems in the most effective way. And so that love for the problem and being able to really anchor that towards, what that destination is, and being able to provide that reason to believe becomes paramount to success.
mm. Okay, okay, that's really interesting. So I think in your book, and I think in your book, I know in your book because I've got a copy of it here, is that you talk about alignment, and we'll go on to talk about the different levels of alignment. But I think you've probably already started to give us a definition of what you see as alignment, but also why alignment isn't so important. But I guess why the name alignment, and in your view, what are some of those challenges around alignment in addition to what you've just said there? Because obviously a lot of what you've just talked about, there is an alignment challenge. What is the what do you is I guess alignment must be really important because that's the name of your book. But in terms of is there anything else to say in terms of why alignment is so key in these sort of transformation efforts?
Well, I think that, there's a couple of things. So the idea of alignment was really the major insight from all of the years of research and interviews that came up. And so it was an incredibly important thing to really make sure that that was the emphasis of the book, because
Mm,
those who were being successful, those who had the most engaged teams that were successfully delivering, there was always this underlying theme of alignment in everything that they did.
yeah.
And so we really wanted to put a spotlight on that and make that the emphasis, so that kind of pinning something that seems somewhat obvious, or maybe um, kind of feel inherently clear to a lot of folks, but maybe isn't fully understood at the depth that it is by those who are leveraging it to its full extent and power.
Mm,
And so when we started to really look at why that's important, we started to see a lot of normal things that happen in organizations that are unintentional challenges that are really common. And so things like not really knowing your customers. And
mm,
so what I mean by that is many businesses will have a good idea of like a general persona, or we identify market with using like demographics or a little bit
yeah.
of basic information, um, which is only part of it. When we look at alignment, those individuals and those leaders are going deeper, and they're building mental models. They're really trying to understand not just what people do, but why they do the things that they
Mm,
do.
mm,
And so
mm,
really understanding behavior is really powerful and an essential piece.
mm.
Also, alignment is a really integral part of managing expectations. It's also a really integral part to managing complexity. And most businesses today are extremely complex in one form or another. And the larger you are, the more complex your organization
Mm.
uh, tends to be. And so those are just a few examples. There are many, many more, but this idea of alignment is a practice and a methodology of how you can manage these things more effectively, which are just common barriers to teams and organizations realizing the success that they're working towards.
Okay, excellent. So I know in your book that you've broken alignment down into four levels, and I think it's good. When we've got this sort of structure to work off, and I'd like to go through those in turn with you, and also I guess because this is a podcast for people who are involved in internal communications and engagement primarily, just to tease out what are the comms and engagement challenges or connections between each of these different levels, if that's okay. So I guess in your book you start with the one, which is the first level is the individual level. So could you explain a little bit about what's the starting point with alignment when we start the individual level, then, please, Jonathan?
Sure. So individual alignment is really talking about helping each member of an organization understand how their work contributes, how it matters and makes a
Mm,
difference. So they know
mm,
why they're doing what they're doing, how that makes a difference, and what impact that makes. And many times that is not very well understood at the individual level, or they're not really understanding how their work contributes to larger organizational goals and
mm,
objectives. And so you see a massive shift, the sea change that's happening right now, where individuals are looking for that clarity. They're looking to be engaged and to know that their work does matter and how they can make a difference. And employers are looking for individuals who are problem solvers and they
mm,
want them to, really be able to contribute and be creative and innovative. Well, in order to help unlock that potential and that ability, you have to help people understand what they do and how that makes a difference in the
mm.
overall objective of the company. And so it really becomes a foundational piece of really building connection in corporate culture that drives the results.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you there. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me, and it's kind of the work we do in our organization is, that whole thing around how do we help people to see where they fit into this bigger picture of our organization, what it does, the landscape, how, and the whole the kind of tried and tested story that everybody tells, the NASA janitor putting a man on the moon, that sort of thing. It's that connection between what I do and that sense that what I do contributes to something bigger than I could, do on my own. It's an amazingly powerful thing. And I'm interested to know from your perspective when it comes to individual alignment, do you see that not only as, because a lot of leaders will say, well, yeah, they've got, we got really good job descriptions, people know what they're meant to be doing, which isn't the point that you're making there. I think how much of what we're saying here is not only knowing how my task contributes, but also how my behavior and my attitude contributes as well. Is that a part of the way you see individual alignment as well?
I do. I think that, you know, you bring up a great point. You might have a great job description that tells me what my responsibilities are and what we do, but it's
Mm.
just important to understand how I should do those things
Yeah,
in
yeah,
order
definitely.
to make an impact. And I think a good example is, there's a lot of conversation these days around, for example, customer experience. But many organizations are still struggling to actually articulate what is customer experience for them and align their organization and their culture as well as their incentives in the organization so that everyone understands that they all contribute in one form or another to that
Mm,
experience.
mm,
And so you might have somebody, out there who's actually working with the customer and they go, I totally get that. That's obvious. I work with the customer.
mm,
And you've got somebody else, well, I'm on the finance team and
mm,
I don't deal with the customer. So that doesn't matter. And it's like, well, no, it all matters. The
mm,
timeliness of maybe getting an invoice, the ability to resolve an issue,
mm.
the professionalism in which you communicate or interact, the, idea of that if I, can do that and I'm also, or I'm timely, let's say on making sure that our bills are paid on time, that all
Mm,
of a sudden now our vendors and our suppliers and the people that we are dependent upon to deliver on that customer experience are going to make us a priority because they know
yeah.
that they can trust us. Those those connections are often not completely made. And it really requires, leaders sometimes to help somebody understand, yes, I need you to do these things and you have these responsibilities. But
Yeah.
how we do these things and why we do them the way that we do
Mm,
also really deeply matter. And this is how you make an impact at every level of the company from where you sit. And we
yeah.
trust you.
Yeah.
And so that becomes really vital.
Yeah. So I guess from a comms and engagement angle, I mean, I think it's a fundamental prerequisite of employee engagement is that I know how my role contributes to the larger scale of things. But I guess from a comms perspective, obviously you're looking at this from the perspective of leadership. But I guess if we're working supporting leaders who in our organization as a trusted advisor in an advisory role, if it's internal comms or employee engagement, I guess it's asking those questions that allow our leaders or kind of force our leaders to be able to talk about that on a regular basis when they're having contact with teams and in this case individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that from what you said that is I think really important to point out is that from a comms perspective and also holistically for the company, but when you think about that, is it's really important to understand what is the common language that you're building in your organization so people can shift from simple coordination to true collaboration. And
Mm.
so let me explain a little bit what I mean by that. Is in the fact that you can coordinate with anybody, but true collaboration takes trust,
Mm.
and it takes a shared understanding to have effective and efficient collaboration. And so that's really important for anybody in an organization, no matter what your role is, to really understand.
Mm.
And so an example of that is when we talk about common language or understanding, again, it goes, I'll just use it since we already referenced it as customer experience. Well,
Yeah.
what that means to me might mean something different to you than it might mean to somebody else. Leaders have to build a common understanding in their organization with intention. And every industry and every company tends to have a lot of acronyms or a lot of shorthand, and it's the way that people interact and exchange, and it's really normal. But without a common language, we tend to push that internal jargon onto customers, and then we're frustrated about the connection, or
Yeah.
we realize that we're not able to effectively communicate and collaborate because sales has a different understanding of something than the product team, or customer support has a different understanding than HR. And so this friction happens, which is very natural in an organization because they're not speaking the same language, or they think they are, but it's because they don't really have an understanding of it in the same way.
Yeah.
And so we really have to build that idea into there, because what it does is it creates a different in culture that elevates the collective competence of the entire organization, and it helps bring more focus to the organization, and really starts to create a stronger ability to create in your comms, especially internal comms, more of an informative, continuous feedback loop that helps you drive the organization's
Yeah.
mechanisms. And so that just becomes an invaluable element that we really have to take a thoughtful approach to.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so the next area, and I guess that in your book you lay them out in separate areas, and I guess there will be naturally some overlap or continuity between them. The team. So, how does the individual alignment differ when we get now into the team, which is by definition a collection of individuals, but obviously hopefully with a shared goal and a shared objective.
Yeah, so team alignment, as you said, shared objective alignment is we're expanding to really look at how do we integrate the unique disciplines and experiences and perspectives of individuals to solve a shared problem. Why are we bringing these individuals together in the first place? What are we asking them to accomplish? And so we're trying to make sure that we're aligning those individuals. So in the sense of product, doesn't matter if it's internal, external, many times we have product managers, we have designers, we have engineers, we might have, other functions that are helping create that. And we have to bring those individuals into alignment so they can really contribute thoughtfully to solving that problem. And so when we talk about alignment in that context, it becomes really important. And what we're shifting is what I can do, and we're shifting in an aligned team. You're shifting the mental model to what we can do together.
Mm.
effectively. And
Okay.
so that becomes really important.
So it from a again, just from an engagement and comms perspective, how would what you might be thinking about doing in that context differ from what you might be doing when we're looking maybe at the more individual level of alignment?
So at the team level, I think it's really important that one, there's many practices, but one of them, I think, from a comms perspective, is you actually have to both practice active listening and communication through the lens of empathy.
Yeah.
And I think that's really critical. If you want to connect individuals with different areas of life experience and expertise, we have to build common ground. And that starts with actively listening and with a lot of clear intention of learning from individuals. And this is actually something that isn't just, good business practice. There's an amazing neuroscientist, Dan Cable. He actually teaches at the London Business School. And he talks about this biological thirst for alignment in his book, Alive at Work. And he talks about this and the idea it's the notion that we get together not just to fulfill the prescription of the job, but really, again, back to this idea of solving problems.
Yeah.
And that ability is actually something that biologically there's a need for. It actually, in your brain, when you have that alignment, you're actually triggering the response mechanisms that release dopamine, that
Yeah.
increase joy, job satisfaction, and engagement. Well, from a comms perspective, with an aligned team, imagine you have a team that's hyper engaged, is experiencing joy in the work that they're doing, even though they might be solving complex problems, and they have belief in what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
going to solve that problem more effectively than I would argue than anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. There's going to be a whole lot more discretionary effort and not just time effort, but quality of thinking and collaboration is going to be a whole different kettle of fish, isn't it, to a team that's not aligned and not got that experience or having that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so I guess we're zooming out now using our helicopter analogy, and now we're zooming out to the level of the organization. So tell us, Jonathan, a little bit more about what we're talking about when we're looking at organizational alignment, which I guess is, I don't know whether it's the more obvious level of alignment or when we think, when you talk about alignment, I guess people would naturally focus in on one of these areas. But let's find out your take on organizational alignment and how it sort of fits in with the model that you've been talking about so far.
Absolutely. I love the helicopter analogy, by the way. So as we zoom out and we look at that, the organization alignment, what that's dealing with is how do you build alignment that reflects the organization's larger vision and
Mm.
strategic priorities. So we're
Mm.
going to that next level up of how do all of these teams and these individuals, how are they contributing and laddering up to this larger vision of the company? The essence of what's the purpose behind the company? Why does this company exist? What are they trying to achieve? And so it's really important that we make sure that there is alignment at that level. And one aspect of that is really understanding too that your resources within your organization to support those teams and those individuals and to realize that vision have to be in alignment with your constraints.
Right.
And I think sometimes constraints are seen as a negative, and I don't mean it that way, but one organization's constraints are different than another's. And this is actually, I think, where amazing innovation takes place because your lens on how you can solve a problem versus another is completely different. And so, a really good analogy of this is Steve Jobs, back when he was creating the Macintosh, needed to have design the mouse, something
Yeah.
that we all use in the computer,
Yeah.
and he needed it to happen for under $20. So the story goes, and it was the Apple engineering team said that's not possible. This is going to cost hundreds of dollars to make and manufacture. Well, different constraints, different perspective. He went and worked with another company called IDEO at the time, and he worked with them, and they designed a mouse that could meet those criteria. They had different constraints, they had a different lens and perspective on the problem, and they were able to innovate in a different way. And it doesn't mean that the team wasn't brilliant at Apple. they had a different lens and perspective because their constraints, the way they saw it, were different than the others and how it aligned. And so I
Mm.
think it's really important that we understand that constraints are actually liberating. They give us opportunity and they can bring focus in a very broad spectrum of potential things to look at, to tackle. And so for an organization, having alignment around your vision and those strategic priorities, and then balancing that with the understanding and real honest assessment of where your constraints are, that allows you to then pick very clear paths forward that
Yeah.
can help you achieve success.
And I guess yeah, you talked about constraints there, but from a challenge perspective, this is where I guess we have the most diversity. I'm thinking more along the lines of the kind of organizations I've worked in, where it's very easy for departments and teams and subdivisions and whatever to have their own priorities, which they fall into the trap of thinking is the most important thing without realizing that, obviously, going back to what we were saying earlier, that that's just part of the contribution towards the overall organizational objective. So I guess from a comms and engagement perspective, what are some of the things we need to be thinking about there? Because I guess this is, I always think about this in terms of, because I used to do chemistry when I was at school, and the kind of the the periodic table, as you get towards those bigger, heavier elements, they're more unstable, they're more likely to decay and break into smaller components and be highly volatile, and I guess that applies to organizations as well. What are some of the challenges that we need to be thinking about when we're trying to keep that cohesion at that level, and that alignment at that level of scale?
So I think what you're touching on is really important, which is twofold. One
Mm,
is it's very natural for organizations to start to silo,
yeah,
where individual groups or divisions or units of a company, they start to prioritize their objective over the others of the company. And I think that's really challenging because there clearly is not a structure in place when that's happening in most cases, where um, there all of the actual incentives that have been created for each of those division or departments and goals are clearly in alignment with the
yeah,
bigger picture,
yeah.
and or it's not communicated. And I think that's a really big miss, is I think transparency of those incentives and objectives are really critical, so that no matter what leadership role you might have in a company, you actually you can see how these things come together, and they're there by intention. I mean,
Mm,
and so you know, I I have I've rarely ever seen where somebody not working incredibly hard with the best of intentions. The challenge is they did not have the context of the environment and
mm,
why these different incentives, how they actually aligned to achieving the bigger goal.
yeah.
And this is something that it can be very difficult. So when we think about the communication side of it, I think transparency in communication, broadening out the information set is really important, because everyone can benefit from understanding the landscape.
Mm,
It doesn't benefit a group to only understand their part, because they do need to understand how their part contributes. So
yeah.
it kind of goes back to some of those very first things we were discussing.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely. So just then finally, the final fourth of your alignment levels is around the market. So so we've talked about individual, team, organization, which is interesting. Are we continuing to zoom out to even further out on a macro level, or is this something slightly different?
no, we're continuing to zoom out. I think, I mean, that is the perfect analogy. And what we're really looking at that is then how does the organization, so, well, first let me define market alignment. So market alignment deals with understanding your customers. Um, and it comes from understanding what problem are you solving for them? What is the impact of that problem? What
Mm,
hurdles do they face? And what reoccurring value could a solution create for that
right.
individual or organization? And so this goes back to really understanding, okay, well, then this ties to, well, why does the organization exist? How am
Yeah.
I bringing value to the marketplace? And one does not work without the other. And so a lot of times this is where, that understanding of customer behavior becomes critically important of
Yeah.
why they do things. And it's, again, goes back to that idea of how do we fall in love with the problem? And this is why I put an emphasis earlier on about why leaders need to love the problem they're solving, because it's important that they're connected to the market and to the users and customers that they're serving.
Yeah.
And so they need to see it through their lens, because that's how they create market fit and that's how they create relevance in the market versus adding a solution that maybe isn't worth somebody adopting or taking on. And it's also a really important perspective to understand honestly what you're competing against, because you may not be competing against similar solutions, but something that seemingly is very, very different, and then is actually the really the main reason why things aren't working. There's a
Yeah.
great case study by a Harvard professor, Clay Christensen, on this idea of jobs to be done, where
Mm.
he was working with a fast food company and they were trying to sell more milkshakes. And
Okay.
they had created new flavors, they had done all these wonderful promotions, nothing worked. And they realized that most milkshakes were actually not sold at lunchtime or dinner, but in the morning. And they were like, well, why is that happening? And so they found out that, well, it was people who had a long commute and wanted to and needed something that would keep them full and that they could consume safely while they're driving to work,
Okay.
until they could make it to lunch. Well, all of a sudden, their landscape of competition completely transformed. It wasn't they were competing against other milkshakes; they were competing against other breakfast items,
Yeah. Yeah.
bagels and pastries and things like that. And what was that going to look like? Because the job all of a sudden was clearer and different. They had a better understanding of the needs, the why behind
Yeah. Yeah.
that customer. And those
Yeah.
those are just transformational insights
Com-
for
com-
organizations, and that alignment is essential.
Completely reframes what it is we're trying to do, doesn't it? We
Yeah.
worked with a client recently who they make big pumps and turbines that move liquids and gases for industrial purposes, and they went through a similar sort of transformation, which was this whole kind of lease or buy or hire or buy, which is what their customers were wanting. He says their customers, they thought they were selling these huge, big, beautifully machined pumps and turbines, when actually what their customers wanted was to move the gas and air and liquids in their businesses efficiently, and they didn't really care whether they owned the pump or whether they leased it or it was on they wanted it to be reliable and working when it was meant to be working. So that then kind of reframed them from being a manufacturer, which they still are, but essentially, but to a service provider, which is to solve the problem that the customer wants. Which sounds obvious, but when you're an engineering company that prides itself on its ability to create beautifully engineered machined pieces of metal and other polymers and that sort of thing, it's very reframing your identity like that can be transformational in that how well it opens up new possibilities and means that actually our core capabilities may not be where we thought they were, or where we need them to be anyway. So it's really always really interesting when organizations have that epiphany, I think, isn't it?
It is absolutely, and I love that story because it's also just such a perfect example of all of a sudden with that insight how it transforms the way you communicate, whether it's externally or internally. Because instead of we're a turbine or pump company, now all of a sudden recognizing we're a company that helps our customers move these air and these liquids safely, reliably, with guarantees of service, because those are the things that really matter.
Yeah, yeah,
That perspective of communication, that alignment of purpose of the product is just so powerful.
yeah,
And
yeah,
now that's an absolute path for growth
yeah, yeah.
as you move forward.
And organizations get it wrong as well, because I used to talk about this when I used to do some training and workshops for leaders around change, and I think equally I always use the example of Olivetti, and I don't think I'm kind of disrespecting the brand there, but Olivetti made the transition out of mechanical typewriters into making computers, and didn't recognize that that was, a fundamental shift away from what they were good at, and so they thought they were in the business of creating word processing machines when actually they were into precision mechanics. And rather than divert that core capability into some area that they knew a lot about and were able to serve, they kind of went into the early PCs, and didn't last very long because that wasn't what they were very good at. So I think it's really important that organizations do take time to reevaluate that. Is this the best use of our core competencies anywhere? And so there's other examples where organizations have just pivoted completely out of a market and gone into a new one because they've actually realized that the market has moved on, but actually what they do is still relevant, but it isn't what they've done in the past. So I always think it's fascinating, those stories where organizations either do that or do it not so well. So I think it's really important part of that alignment process and journey that you're talking about there. Yeah. So in terms of, just for completeness, then from a comms and engagement perspective, then just I think it's probably been fairly clear from what you've said there. Are any other specific areas that if I'm working in comms or engagement, to think about that market alignment piece? Is it about kind of reminding them what our customers, what our market needs, what who the people there with who we're serving, and what their needs and how their needs is shifting, or is there something else to that as well?
Well, I think we've talked about it, but I would just really reinforce that when you're in that position of communication or engagement, how important it is to understand the problem, create the connection for people, whether it's internal or externally, about understanding, what is this problem we're solving? What is the impact of that problem? Help me personalize it. Help me understand it. It's to, we do a lot of work in healthcare, and a good example of that, it's really easy to think about, well, how can we efficiently move and provide the people and through a hospital and provide the best care? But that doesn't actually address really what's needed, which is somebody's in a state of distress in most cases if they're in a hospital, or they might be in a state of anxiety. How do you care for them? What does care really mean in that case? Is that care of just their physical ailment, or is that really care of them as a person holistically? We have to build these deeper and bigger and more important connections in our communications. And so that's really, really essential. There's, for example, we worked on a project once with a hospital, and on the product team, nobody had actually spent any time in one of their hospitals. Not really, and not from the patient point of view. So we took a small group of leaders, and we spent some time. We sat in the emergency room and just listened.
Yeah.
And we said, just take some notes. And all of a sudden, it's like, wow, all these things that we're really excited about process and doing this thing and that thing, like that doesn't matter. I've got this family here, and a mother who's sick with 2 kids, and trying to figure out how to navigate this complex situation when they don't feel good and these things are going on. It's like completely changes how you communicate.
Yeah.
And understanding that changed how they engage internally. It changed so many facets. And so I think really reinforcing understanding the behavior, the situation, and connecting with empathy with your audiences is just such a paramount and one of the most powerful tools you can do to drive effective communication and engagement. And so I just put an emphasis on that, because that, if you're not starting from anywhere else, that is the most powerful thing you can start with, I think, to start to build alignment today.
I totally agree, Mamo. I know it's kind of more made for TV and has its editorial challenges, but I'm a great fan of programs like The Undercover Boss and things like that, where you put people out there and empathize and put them in your customer's shoes, where they have to be anonymous and see what it's like through a customer's lens, and I think it's always fascinating the good and bad things they find in that situation that they would never know sat behind their desk or in the boardroom. So it's definitely something that I think, and we've talked about this on the show before in interviews with interviewees, about getting your people, getting your leaders out and experiencing what your customers are experiencing, or at least finding a way to bring that to them in a very visceral way is really important, rather than just looking at customer feedback data and all of that, which is great. But I think there's nothing like the actual experience of what it's like to interact with our businesses there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, one of the top retailers here in the United States, they have every single person in their corporate office has to work at least 2 weeks a year in one of their stores,
Mm,
regardless.
mm,
And that includes the CEO and the board of
mm.
directors. It's
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah,
And the power of that, when you come back and you realize what I'm doing and how it supports the people in those stores and how it supports the communities, and why that community involvement is so important at each store location around the country, is it's such a powerful advantage they've created, because it's not just a one-time thing. It's something that they practice to maintain alignment in their organization
yeah, yeah.
every
I,
year.
I,
And
I,
it's beautiful.
I do. I love that sort of thing, and it's I've been in those situations myself. I remember I worked in a food factory, and again we had to do a similar thing every year. We at least one day or one shift we have to go and spend 8 hours doing, standing packing food into cardboard boxes, and by the end of it, your arms and shoulders were just absolutely full of lactic acid and and burning, and you kind of had a lot more empathy for the how hard the job was. And we when we talk about why are people so unhappy, you kind of recognize, well, it's a tough job, and we don't make it any easier for them. And do we give them the right equipment? And then there's the ergonomics, so much more easy to again relate to them, and also demonstrate that you care about their well-being and the working environment as well. So I'm a big fan of that sort of thing, and it's always a good leveler, I think, when people do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
um I want to bring things to a conclusion, though, Jonathan. It's really, really interesting. I mean, just in terms of, without being too kind of simplistic, one or two things that, if I've listened to it, I'm sure people will be listening to what you've said, and it will be resonating for them, and they're maybe again sort of faced with the usual dilemma of, well, where do I start? What would be one or two relatively simple things that someone could try to do to start? Obviously, getting hold of your book will be a good thing. We'll talk about that in a moment, but to start to get some alignment within these levels, because there's a lot of work there potentially, and it could be a bit overwhelming. Where would you sort of recommend that there's a good place to start?
I think it can be very overwhelming, and I want to fully acknowledge that. I mean, I think what you're highlighting there is really important to acknowledge. I think that one of the most important places you can start is to be really clear, whether it's at a department level and understanding what is the purpose and intention of this department, or
Mm-hmm.
if you're the CEO of a company or in the leadership team and you're saying, are we really clear about what our vision is? Does this clearly articulate, where we're going as a company? And so I
Mm,
separate that from purpose, because we're not talking about mission statements. We're talking about the vision, the direction of the company.
mm,
As that and that's an important distinction in itself. But to really be able to focus and look at that and say, is it clear as an organization where we're going? Is it clear why it matters? And is it measurable?
mm.
If it doesn't communicate those three things, I would urge anybody listening to go back and visit that and
Yeah.
understand why.
Mm,
And so that the anatomy of a strong vision is it's talked about from a marketing and a brand perspective a lot of the time, but it's missing in many cases examples and components that really help us build alignment and
mm,
really help us understand how we can start to then collaborate with the others around us and communicate. And I think starting there is such a powerful place, because you can really quickly start to unify and you can get your team involved in that process.
Mm, mm.
And so I'm going to highlight one trap just for anybody listening.
Yeah.
The measurability, usually a lot of the easy go-to is revenue for a lot of companies. It's not the right metric. And the reason
Okay.
I say that is that revenue is a lagging indicator. It's
Yeah.
a result of you providing the value that you provide. So I encourage anybody listening, try to find a metric that is based on the value you create and isn't a byproduct of that value. It
Mm.
is so much more powerful to inspire your team and build alignment at every level, including with the market, when you can understand that the value is what generates revenue, and that's an outcome of you doing that better than anybody else for that customer. And so
Yeah.
anchor that into your vision.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, I think that's a really great tip. I always use when I'm talking to people is to say you wouldn't drive your car by just purely looking in the rearview mirror, and that's essentially what you're doing when you're looking at lagging indicators, isn't it? And when we talk about a vision, and the vision is all kind of backward looking, and we'll only ever know a few months after we've delivered it or not. It's again, for me, a vision has to be something you're looking through the windshield to see it, not as I say, through the back window. So I think it's really a case of using that metaphor. That's one I use quite a lot to get people to think, well, what can we see ahead of us rather than behind us that tells us that we're doing a good job? And I think it's often interesting then to see what they come up with.
Yeah, I love that review. I'm going to use
Yeah,
that one.
there's no problem. Yeah,
I have to
you
admit.
can have that one in
Um,
return for the.
you asked for two starting points, and I'll give you one other one that's really
Yes,
simple that
please.
I
Yeah,
encourage
yeah.
everybody is that we talked a lot about the importance of a common language and understanding. And one of my favorite things that anybody listening can implement in their next conversation
Mm,
immediately is this ability to, when you're having a conversation, to ask somebody a simple question like, "What did you hear me say?"
mm,
Or "What did you think I meant by that?" And
mm,
ask them to mirror that back. And
mm.
it's a really powerful mechanism for a couple of reasons. One, it allows you to align with that individual. Are you on the same page? Do you have a shared understanding? Because if you think you do and you move on, you might be setting yourself up for a lot of rework or delays in achieving what you're looking to do.
Mm,
The other thing is it's an incredibly demonstration of respect for the other person. And I
mm.
think that's really important because what it really does is it shows that you're actively listening and processing what they're saying. And it really is important that don't try to be overly efficient with people. We want to be efficient with processes, we want to be efficient with resources, but we don't want to be efficient from the perspective of, you know, that this person's perspective or what they need from that engagement with you is not important, and so being able to mirror back what you're hearing.
Yeah,
And so I try to practice this all the time. I try to remind myself all this time. Somebody will come to me in a meeting, whether it's a client or a colleague, and I will intentionally pause, and then I will try to mirror back what I heard to make sure that we're in alignment. And I
yeah.
use this as a way to educate myself and understand, but it's also incredibly powerful. And it's been one of the most effective tools I've had in building deeper relationships, as well as ensuring the work that we're doing is moving forward in the right way.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent tip, and I can't remember. I remember reading a book as a long time ago now, but and it was talking. I'm sure it was in context of and I know this is always a dangerous analogy to use, but in business context. But it was about elite military units, and I'm pretty sure it was in that I remember seeing this. It was all the principle. I think it was called the back brief, which is whenever these kind of units are getting these briefings to go in with a very specific objective to achieve, and it's kind of going to be very complicated on the ground, and that the guys who are giving these orders can't possibly imagine what these guys are going to face and how they're going to deal with it, and they're very much empowered to make those decisions at the point of action. Was this idea of the back brief, which is after you've been briefed, you then have to play back to the people who've briefed you what your understanding of the objectives and the intent, so that there's a real clarity and no ambiguity, because obviously in that sort of situation people's lives are on the line. And it just reminded me of what you'd said there, which I think is often forgotten. We just we'll give some direction, and then we'll kind of walk out of the room and just assume that everybody's kind of got it, or just in absence of questions, assume that no one's asked anything or put their hand up, is they've all got it, and clearly it's all clear as crystal. But I think often, like you say, is you play that back to me now, what I've just said to you, and it's not trying to catch people out. It's literally checking that taking responsibility for the communication as the transmitter of that, and if it hasn't gone right, then that's not your fault. That's mine, that I've not communicated it properly. I think it's a really good frame to take. So anyway, look, it's been absolutely fantastic, Jonathan. I really enjoyed that, and thank you for your, the depth that you've gone into there and the enthusiasm that you've shown. So one of the things I'm going to do is going to put some links in the show notes. So and we chatted about this briefly before we started recording. So we're going to put your link into your LinkedIn profile, and we're also going to put a link into your website. We're also going to put a link into the book, and there was another link that we said we were going to put in, which I can't remember. Remind me what that one was, Jonathan, or have we covered them all?
We talked about also adding a link for the Emerge Interactive website for anybody that's interested. There's a ton of free resources, materials related to many of the topics, especially around product that we've been talking about, that are available there as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, and we'll do that. So we'll put those 4 links into the show notes. And all that remains to say is, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time today, especially as it's your final day before you're off to Hawaii. And wish you a very pleasant and relaxing time there. And I'm sure you will be getting people getting in touch with you, finding out more about your work, and hopefully getting a copy of your book and finding out more about how they can create alignment within their own organization. So thank you so much for your time, Jonathan.
Greg, thank you so much again for having me. This was an absolute pleasure. I loved our conversation today.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you've got any ideas for episodes you'd like us to cover in future, you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can use the feedback form at engagingic.com. If you're not already subscribed to the show via your podcast platform, please do so. And if you could leave a review for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have links to other episodes at engagingic.com. All of our previous episodes are available there. And if you're interested in our visual communication services, our big pictures, our learning maps, our explainer videos, and also our live graphic recording, please get in touch with us again at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Thank you.